speak about a book called Camera Aloft. It's about Edward Steichen and his work in the Great War, and in effect, not quite inventing, but pioneering modern aerial reconnaissance. And von Hardesty, who many of you may know, is a retired curator, and we've stayed friends ever since, and I did the research for the book. So Steichen is mainly known for his iconic work in photography in the 20th century. He also had a career as an artist, a photographer, a celebrated photographer, and a museum curator. However, his role in shaping photo reconnaissance in the First World War is much less known. Effectively, he invented aerial reconnaissance as a useful tool in modern warfare. Many historians and experts on Steichen, of whom many dozens of books have been written, refer to his World War I service and the work he did as the lost years of his life, because much less has been written. If you look through the many literature of Steichen, you don't find much about his World War I work and what he did. Steichen enlisted in the U.S. Army Signal Corps in 1917. And he did 18 months of service, total of 18 months of service with the American Expeditionary Forces in Europe. The Great War, as it's sometimes called, marked the advent, as I'm sure you all know, of many new and lethal weapons, poison gas, the aircraft, tanks, machine guns, and lots of other things, all weapons, of course, of mass killing. But lesser known of that time is the fact that it was the first major use, though cameras had been used in the Civil War from balloons and in the hunt for Pancho Villa to some degree, but airborne cameras had not been used in a major way until the battlefields of Europe. So there was an initial period in which there was no real doctrine for using the camera. They said, hey, it's a great idea, we got this airplane, let's take up a camera. But there wasn't any real plan or strategy to make the aerial reconnaissance a major part of the war effort, which was later the case. When he first went into the military, Steichen thought he would like to be a latter-day Matthew Brady and be out there taking pictures. But it soon became clear that in the highly mechanized and changed nature of World War I on the modern battlefield, that wasn't something that was a good idea or even practical. But he realized the potential, nonetheless, of aerial photography. And in 1917, he transferred to the Air Service's photographic section, working with now legendary figures such as Mason Patrick and Billy Mitchell, who were in the group. Now, throughout Steichen's service, the aerial reconnaissance and the role of the camera, and indeed the role of airplanes, were constantly evolving from one day to the next. And some of the techniques of using the camera were adapted from early work already done by Britain and France. And he turned them into something that America could use. Now, he later became he was chief of air photography of the U.S. Air Service, and he dealt primarily with policy issues. He was not involved directly with the actual operational missions. It's not clear, but it's not believed that he was considered so valuable that he ever actually went up on a combat mission. He took a couple flights behind the lines, but he was regarded as too essential, and the possibility of his loss removed him from actually going up with a camera over enemy lines. It just didn't happen. He worked mainly on the training and of the essential photo sections of getting these people ready to go in and perform their combat mission. For example, there often were urgent requests. There was a battle or something shaping up, and they had an urgent request like, we need pictures yesterday. They didn't talk like that then, I don't think, but I hope not. But they would have to change where they were going to fly, say this quadrant, and go to that quadrant. And their operational goals often change fairly quickly. Now, let me step back a minute. The beginnings of the Great War found Steichen, of all places, in France, in a town called Vangoulet. I forgive any manglement of the pronunciation, but Vangoulet. Anyway, it's on the River Marne, and he had a place that he loved to spend a lot of time, and he lived there for a while. In August 1914, one morning in the war, as they say, they got word that the Germans were on the way, and they had to leave very quickly. So he already at that time had an international reputation in photography, but all of a sudden they had to pack up and leave their home, which grieved them greatly. He did find that after the war that it had been damaged, and they had to leave, and they had to get out of Dodge quick, and so they had to get back to the U.S., and he didn't have a lot of money at the time, so friends in the U.S. helped him get a boat ticket for him and his family back to New York. They went to New York City, and they stayed there for a while. They got out within the next less than a day after they left. The Germans overwhelmed the town, and they were extremely lucky. Then he went back to the U.S. And he spent. They arrived in September 14, and then for the next 3 years he waited impatiently for the U.S. to join the war because he wanted to fight. But that, as we know, didn't happen until 1917, 3 years later. Then when it happened, he immediately joined the U.S. Army Signal Corps and ended up in the newly found photographic division. Not a surprise, given his renown already as a photographer. The aerial camera evolved into a weapon of war to access battlefield movements in near real time. British and French experts came to the U.S. to share with America the critical lessons they had learned from their own experience. And working under enormous pressure, since it was war, Steichen was charged with developing new U.S. combat units which could, as soon as possible again, get overseas and start playing a role in the war. And he played an essential role in that. Then in November 1917, he was finally deployed to Europe to join the action. And his wartime, it was a very active thing. He moved constantly from one American expeditionary base to another. And these are some of his comments that he offered. The ability to observe the battlefield in real time. In real time on the enemy's stronghold is extremely important. Observation is a key weapon to break the stalemate of trench warfare that we now face. This is a quote. This aircraft provides a new tool that we did not have before to observe the enemy and to help correlate or see the results of our artillery fire. At first, they used handheld cameras that were anything but automatic. Each camera they had to put a plate in, and they were handheld, and it was very cumbersome, especially if you were flying along in the observer's seat. But then automatic cameras did come along, and that greatly helped the ability to take rapid-fire pictures and to develop them and get things done much more quickly than otherwise. One of the major reconnaissance photograph tools was photo interpreters. Early in the war, they developed people who did nothing, who didn't fly the missions, but did nothing but read the pictures, which was critical, and learn as much information as they could about the enemy formations. Especially in times of trench warfare, it was very important to be able to take pictures of every trench line and analyze how many soldiers there were and what their vulnerabilities were. And as you might imagine, because of the nature of the planes having to swoop low over the trenches, the losses among the pilots, American and otherwise, flying these photo reconnaissance, the loss rates were quite high because of the nature. They were very exposed to ground fire, and sometimes they had to fly low, for which they paid a price. And of course, most people didn't survive these crashes. And as I mentioned, Steichen never did a mission. He was too valuable. Let's see. And they had to fly a particular straight and low pattern, which, while it made it vulnerable, was really the only way for them to get the pictures that they needed. And each time they flew that course, they were quite vulnerable. One major contribution of Steichen's was that he developed a special process or procedure that standardized the whole idea of photo reconnaissance. Apparently each squadron or each group did its own thing, and he helped set up a criterion and an approach, a method that was adopted wisely among the Allies. And he also attended several inter-allied, the Allies, where he spoke. He was very well regarded, of course, from the civilian career, and he became liaison to the whole Allied group because of his expertise in photo reconnaissance. As a result, in August of 1918, Mason Patrick, who was the overall commander of the Air Forces, of the U.S. Air Command, appointed him chief of air photography for the Army Air Corps. And that was a reward for all the work he had done and recognized the things that he had accomplished. Okay, let's see. In his new post as chief of air photography, Steichen played a significant role in the major battles near the end of the war that I'll talk a little bit about. Maybe I have some pictures I can show you. Okay, let's see. Some of the German positions, especially in the St. Mihiel salient and in other areas, on rivers and the Mihiel salient, were particularly challenging because the Germans had significantly had a chance to build them up. They were very heavily defended with anti-aircraft guns and everything else. And a series of pictures that Steichen's photographic section generated was extremely helpful because it enabled the military to target the positions of the German guns and take them out. And at one point, an armada of about 1,000 planes participated in the Battle of the Marne at various times to destroy them. And then when the war ended in November 1918, Steichen did not, let me get this quote, I want to read to you, did not celebrate. Let's see if I can find this letter that he wrote. He wrote a letter to his parents, and he said, "The whole monstrous horror of war seemed to fall down on me and smother me. I smelled the rotting carcasses of dead horses, saw the 3 white faces of the first American dead I had seen. I could hear the rat-tat-tat of machine gun fire as one lay flat on one's belly, trying to dig into the earth to escape it, and the ping, ping, ping of bullets coming through the leaves overhead. I saw the dried blood around the bullet hole in a young soldier's head, and it was only one of the hundreds of thousands. How could nations of men have been so stupid? What was life for if it had to end like this? What was the use of living?" That's how he summed it up. And now I can show you some pictures and take. Oh, any questions that anybody has?
One question before you go on. You mentioned there was some automation that occurred during this period in the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
I'm used to thinking of modern cameras and some of the automation in that. What kind of automation are we talking about?
I think it was a system of getting the plates in and out more quickly. because they were using plates. And it was, it wasn't what we would call full automation,
Right.
but, and storing them in a better way.
Plate magazines, and actually they moved toward roll film. So they would have a magazine so that
Right.
instead of having to pull a dark slide,
Yeah.
put a new
Right.
plate in, you would actually just have a sort of an interchange area, so you could pull the plate out, and the next, and it's still in the dark, the next plate drops down, and you slide that one into a storage area.
Right.
The
And
exposed
kept it
plate.
intact till they
So you
could
can, so
develop.
it's just sort of a,
That's what I
you're ready to
suspected.
go.
Yeah, that's what, it was a step toward, you know.
Well, the Russians had such a device at the beginning of the war, didn't they?
Yes, yes,
Is that right?
but what happened as far as exchange of technology and information, it was not always lateral, John. And John Barrett and I were looking at Austro-Hungarian mechanisms as well, just the other day that we have images of. But on the Allied side, they had problems with static on film, and so they couldn't use film because they were having issues of static discharge. And it wasn't until the very end of the war that they were able to overcome this. And I think that was all because of Kodak
Yeah, it would have been
Kodak was the
yeah.
problem, or Kodak was the solution?
solution.
Okay, I think all sides would have had static problems, actually.
The Russians had resolved it though,
Had the Germans themselves any
and
similar?
the Germans have
advances?
resolved it also
Okay,
by that time. But go on.
sorry, go ahead.
There's the iconic picture of him, one of the few that I think we have.
So on the back of that, he's got plates or a cartridge that will work?
In the picture that, I don't
I
know.
could not tell you on that
I
one.
can't tell you.
It looks like it might just be a plate
Could it?
camera, but
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know.
It's tight, but it's multiple.
it
But
may.
it's sealed,
it
you would be able to
maybe-
remove it and put another one in, or?
Well,
No, you just slide it out, and then the next one comes in.
There may, well, from that one, I can't tell if there is any provision for the transfer mechanism,
Right.
or if it's just a stack of dark slide, or a stack of plates where you'd have a separate dark slide for each one or not.
Right.
I don't see,
These are some of the typical pictures, a representative picture of what they would, you know, have brought back.
Resolution was good, it's.
Yeah, the resolution is pretty good.
well, you're playing with contact frames.
And this, you can see the bomb dropping here. This is a great shot. You see the bomb falling. Considering the conditions, these are pretty good shots. You'll see. Right? And that's, shall we say, it looks like an after shot of a town that's been bombed. That's the after shot, okay. You can see the difference. Big difference, okay? And these are similar pictures. Some of these are, I believe some of these are bomb pox from bombs. These are just the kind of pictures.
Well, it's the same location.
Yeah, same location.
Same location.
Right, and it shows, yeah, different.
It's more likely to be shell fire than I think bomb.
Shot, yeah, shot
But
fire, right. You're right, a
Based on
massive
the
shell.
number, yeah,
Absolutely.
probably before, during, and after.
As long as it didn't make it. These, I think, I'm not sure.
Those were, as I recall,
Drawings,
drawings, the interpreters
Yeah,
overlays.
from the pictures. Yeah,
From photo, I think there was a facing plate of the photographs themselves.
that makes sense, yeah. These are just more shots of action. That's an area where I believe they turned the planes around. It was like a training thing, and they would turn the planes around in the middle and get them going. These are just reconnaissance shots. Again.
Yeah, that would have been from the
Stuff from
training manual.
pictures, yeah, exactly.
That's,
From training manual, showing the picture and showing the interpretation.
Exactly.
And if you go back to that other one, if you go back 2 slides,
Sure.
I believe this is a mosaic, what you're looking at.
Oh, assembled, you're right, I think the lines in it.
Yeah.
Steichen.
Steichen and Barnes.
Which
and-
one? Which one?
Second from the left.
Yeah. Steichen. That's the man.
Barnes is the second from the right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, okay. That's the photographic section in all its glory. Dropping on the shot. Have I read them?
No.
No, I'll take your time, there's no rush.
We love Photoshop.